Sweet revenge. How I got back at my noisy upstairs neighbor. Hey Reddit, I, 28F, have a story of sweet revenge that unfolded recently with my noisy upstairs neighbor, 30M. Here's what happened. I live in a cozy apartment complex where everyone generally respects each other's space. However, about 6 months ago, a new tenant moved in above me who seemed to have no regard for noise levels. From loud music at odd hours to what sounded like late-night dance parties, it was becoming unbearable. At first, I tried talking to him politely. I knocked on his door a couple of times to ask if he could keep it down, especially during late nights on weekdays when I had to wake up early for work. Each time, he apologized and promised to be more considerate, but the noise persisted. After weeks of disrupted sleep and failed attempts at reasoning, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. I started documenting every instance of excessive noise, noting down dates, times, and the type of disturbance. Armed with this log, I reached out to the building management, explaining the situation and requesting their intervention. Management seemed sympathetic, but said they needed more evidence to take action. Frustrated but determined, I invested in a sound meter to measure the decibel levels coming from his apartment during the night. Sure enough, my recording showed that the noise exceeded permissible levels several times. Armed with this new evidence, I contacted management again and insisted they take immediate action. They agreed to issue a formal warning to my neighbor and informed him that any further noise complaints could result in fines or even eviction. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet. It seemed my neighbor had finally gotten the message. He became much more considerate about noise levels, and I could finally enjoy peaceful nights of uninterrupted sleep. Reflecting on the experience, I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that my efforts had paid off. Sometimes, sweet revenge isn't about retaliation, but about standing up for your rights and seeking a peaceful resolution. So, Reddit, that's how I got back at my noisy upstairs neighbor, through persistence and documentation. Sweet revenge. How I dealt with a coworker who stole my ideas. Hey Reddit, buckle up for a story of sweet revenge in the workplace. I, 30M, had to navigate a tricky situation with a coworker, late 20s who had a habit of stealing my ideas and presenting them as his own. I work in a competitive industry where creativity and innovation are key to success. Unfortunately, this coworker seemed more interested in advancing his career at the expense of others' hard work. The first few times it happened, I brushed it off, thinking it might have been a misunderstanding. But when it became a recurring pattern, him taking credit for my ideas in meetings and even getting recognition from our boss, I knew I had to take action. Instead of confronting him directly, which could have escalated tensions, I decided to outsmart him. I started documenting all my ideas meticulously, including timestamps, detailed descriptions, and any email trails where I had discussed them with colleagues. One day, during a team meeting where he presented yet another one of my ideas as his own, I calmly pulled out my notebook and opened to the page where I had jotted down the idea weeks ago. I waited until he finished his presentation and then politely pointed out that the idea was actually mine, showing the evidence I had gathered. There was a moment of awkward silence in the room as everyone processed what had just happened. My coworker tried to stutter out an explanation, but it was clear he had been caught red-handed. Our boss, who valued honesty and integrity, intervened and asked for an explanation. I presented my documentation calmly and professionally, emphasizing that I wanted credit where it was due. From that day onward, my coworker's behavior changed drastically. He became more cautious about taking credit for others' work and even started acknowledging my contributions publicly. I felt a sense of vindication knowing that I had stood up for myself and my ideas without resorting to petty actions. Sweet revenge, in this case, wasn't about getting back at him but about ensuring fair recognition and maintaining a professional environment. So, Reddit, that's how I dealt with a coworker who stole my ideas, by being prepared, assertive, and ultimately getting the recognition I deserved. Sweet revenge. How I handled a neighbor who kept parking in my spot. Hey Reddit, I've got a tale of sweet revenge involving a neighbor, 40M, who wouldn't stop parking in my designated spot. Here's how it went down. I live in a small apartment complex where parking spots are assigned to tenants. Each unit has its own designated spot, clearly marked with a number. However, my neighbor seemed to have a habit of parking in my spot whenever it was convenient for him, especially late at night or on weekends. At first, I tried leaving polite notes on his windshield, asking him to park elsewhere as my spot was reserved. But these notes were often ignored or torn down. It became clear that he wasn't going to change his behavior voluntarily. Frustrated with the situation, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I contacted management and reported the issue, providing them with timestamps and photos of his car parked in my spot on multiple occasions. They assured me they would speak to him about respecting assigned parking. Despite management's intervention, my neighbor continued to disregard the rules. It was then that I decided to take matters into my own hands, literally. I purchased a wheel lock device designed for preventing unauthorized parking and placed it on my spot whenever I wasn't using it. Sure enough, the next time my neighbor tried to park in my spot, he was met with the wheel lock. Infuriated, he knocked on my door demanding I remove it. I calmly explained that the spot was reserved for me and that he needed to find another place to park. Realizing he couldn't bully his way out of this, he eventually backed down and started parking in his own spot. From that day onward, he never parked in my spot again. Looking back, I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that I had found a practical solution to the problem without resorting to confrontation or escalation. Sweet revenge, in this case, was about protecting my rights and ensuring that rules were respected in our shared living space. So, Reddit, that's how I handled a neighbor who kept parking in my spot, by taking action and defending what was rightfully mine. Sweet revenge. How I got even with a bully from high school. Hey Reddit, I've got a story of sweet revenge from my high school days that you might appreciate. Back then, I, 29F, had to deal with a relentless bully, now 30M, who made my life miserable. He was one of those classic high school bullies, always picking on others, spreading rumors, and making snide remarks. I was one of his favorite targets, perhaps because I was quieter and more introverted than most. For years, I endured his taunts and insults, trying my best to ignore him and focus on my studies. But the emotional toll was immense, and it left a lasting impact on my self-esteem. Fast forward to our 10-year high school reunion. I debated whether to attend, unsure if I wanted to face my past tormentors. Eventually, I decided to go, partly out of curiosity and partly out of a desire to reconnect with old friends who had supported me through tough times. At the reunion, I spotted my former bully across the room. He had grown older, but his arrogant demeanor hadn't changed much. He seemed oblivious to the pain he had caused others during our school years. Throughout the evening, I kept my distance from him, focusing instead on catching up with friends and enjoying the nostalgia of being back in our old school gymnasium. Towards the end of the night, as people were starting to say their goodbyes, I found myself standing near him at the bar. He made a snide comment about my appearance, a reminder of his old ways. But this time, instead of letting it slide, I decided to confront him calmly and directly. I told him how his bullying had affected me and others, how it had made our school years much harder than they needed to be. He scoffed at first, brushing off my words as irrelevant to him now. But then I dropped a bombshell. I had recorded our conversation using my phone's voice memo app. In that recording, he had made several derogatory remarks about other classmates, including ones that could potentially damage his reputation now as an adult. His face turned pale as he realized the implications. I calmly explained that I didn't want to ruin his life or career, but that I needed him to understand the consequences of his actions. He apologized awkwardly, muttering that he had changed since high school and didn't mean any harm. I accepted his apology, but made it clear that I expected him to reflect on his behavior and treat others with respect moving forward. Walking away from that reunion, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Sweet revenge, in this case, wasn't about vengeance but about confronting the past and reclaiming my own sense of self-worth. So, Reddit, that's how I got even with a bully from high school, by standing up for myself and forcing him to acknowledge the impact of his actions. Sweet revenge. How I responded to a rude customer at my coffee shop. Hey Reddit, I've got a story of sweet revenge from my days working in a coffee shop that I think you'll enjoy. Here's what happened. I used to work as a barista in a bustling coffee shop downtown. Most customers were friendly and respectful, but every now and then, we'd encounter someone who was rude or entitled. One particularly busy morning, a customer, 50M, came in during the morning rush. He seemed impatient from the moment he walked through the door, tapping his foot and sighing loudly as he waited in line. When he finally reached the counter, he ordered a complicated drink with several modifications, which was no problem for us. We were used to custom orders. However, as I started making his drink, he began criticizing everything from the speed of service to the temperature of the milk. I remained calm and polite, trying to accommodate his requests as best as I could. But he continued to berate me and my coworkers, making snide remarks about our competence and professionalism. As I handed him his drink, he scoffed and muttered something under his breath about finding a better coffee shop next time. That was the last straw for me. Instead of letting his rude behavior ruin my day, I decided to respond with a touch of sweet revenge. I discreetly added a shot of decaffeinated espresso to his drink, knowing that he had specifically asked for extra caffeine. He left the shop in a hurry, oblivious to the slight alteration in his order. I watched from the counter as he took a sip and walked away, hopefully with a lesson learned about treating service workers with respect. Reflecting on the incident later, I realized that sometimes sweet revenge isn't about grand gestures, but about asserting your dignity and responding to negativity with a touch of humor. So, Reddit, that's how I responded to a rude customer.